Captured effortlessly, that's the way it was. Happened so naturally, I did not know it was love. The next thing I felt was you holding me close. What was I gonna do? I let myself go, and now we're flying through the stars. I hope this night will last forever.
Hi, I'm John Cullen. Welcome to another episode of In Plain Sight. In this episode, we're going to take a closer look at some of the things that I've been tweeting. If we look at some of the tweets that I've been putting out, when I put together these charts, where's this data coming from? So this is an example of a chart showing the breakdown of how many school-age children died with COVID-19. So this is children 5 to 17 years old, and I put this out on Twitter. What was this? It says April 28th, so this is recently. Well, where does this data come from? I cite the CDC, but it's not immediately obvious where to find this data. So in this episode of In Plain Sight, I'm going to show you how to go to the CDC, where to find this data, so that you can show your friends, your family, your coworkers what some of the facts are. Now that we have a new Department of Misinformation or something in the U.S. government, it's really important to be able to discern fact from nonsense. So in this episode, we're going to focus on the CDC's websites exclusively. We're going to go to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and we're going to look at their website and see if we can find the links, and then I'm going to show you where those links are to get to this data. So without any further ado, why don't we get started? Welcome to In Plain Sight. I'm John Cullen. Thanks for joining.
Happened so naturally, I did not know it was love. The next thing I felt was you holding me close. What was I gonna do? I let myself go, and now
if we look at the Johnny Hoover YouTube channel, you go to YouTube and you search for John E. Hoover. The significance of John E. Hoover is you may be familiar with J. Edgar Hoover, and so this is sort of an alternate universe. J. Edgar Hoover, it was John Edgar Hoover. So John E. Hoover is a play on J. Edgar Hoover, and that's the channel. When you get to the channel, the home page shows a whole bunch of different things like videos and live streams and playlists and links to other channels. If you click on the little videos tab, it shows you all the videos in chronological order going back in time as you scroll. And what I wanted to focus on was sort of a series of videos that I put together like this one. It says how many children aged 0 through 17 died with COVID-19 in Michigan. And then there's another one here that says how many children died with COVID-19 in Virginia. Well, where did I get the data from? Each one of these has some sort of overlay from Google, YouTube saying COVID-19, get the latest information from the Department of Health about COVID-19. And you can click on that to learn more. But where am I getting the data that I'm using to make all these spreadsheets? And when you click on that link, by the way, that Google gave us, it tells us there's a potential security risk ahead. That's interesting. Firefox detected a potential security threat and did not continue to www.departmentofhealth.gov.ph. I guess because I'm in the Philippines. Is that why they won't send me there? I don't know. So won't send me there. Very interesting. So Firefox thinks that the link that Google is providing is a little dangerous. This was this link here. COVID-19. Get the latest information from the DOH, Department of Health, about COVID-19. See more resources on Google. And here it says learn more. When I click on learn more, I'm getting a potential security risk. So this is just real-time fun with John Cullen. All right, so let's get back to these videos on the John Cullen channel. And each one of this series that I was just showing you a second ago, what I was doing was going to the data at the CDC and pulling it up by state, looking at children, school-age children. Here's New Jersey, Virginia, different parts of the country. So in this episode, what I wanted to do in plain sight was to show you where this data is hiding, so to speak, in the CDC's websites, right? So they've got a number of different web pages here, and it can take forever to try and find this data. So we're going to cut to the chase and show you where the information is that I've been citing for the past 2 years about this pandemic. Now, on the lower left-hand side, morbidity and mortality weekly report, there's a lot of good information there. On the lower right side is something that says data and statistics, and there's a lot of good information there. But why don't we just go right to the page that I've been using most? There are two major pages that the CDC publishes with regard to coronavirus. This one, which gives us daily updates of totals by week and state. And what's interesting here, we can see how many people died with coronavirus. So these are all deaths involving coronavirus disease, pneumonia and influenza, reported to NCHS by time period and jurisdiction of occurrence. So for some reason, it appears that they have conflated the influenza data. And it says that this data is as of April 28th, 2022. So it shows us that the week ending 4/23/2022, there were 435 deaths involving COVID. The prior week, there were 737. The prior week, 922. 1,287 the week before that. That was the week that ended April 2nd. And then 2,000, 2,800, 4,000, 5,000, 8,000, 11,000, big numbers. So back in January of 2022, we saw over 20,000 people a week dying. The week that ended January 22nd, the week that ended January 29th. Since that time, since January 29th, so February, March, and not even all of April yet, deaths in the United States have dropped from 20,442 down to 435 just this past week. So this is data that's in plain sight. You can see this on cdc.gov, NCHS/NVSS/VSRR COVID-19 index. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up the link over here so that you guys can see this page. So this is the daily updates of totals by week and state. And now I'm going to show you another page that I've been using a lot. And that's this one. All right. So this is another page. Let me show you guys what the link looks like for this one. Here's the link. You can follow along using that. All right, and that's where we are right now. So on this website, the CDC, upper left-hand corner, Center for Disease Control and Prevention, which if you click on that, it'll take you back to the home page. But I'm going to click the back button because I don't even know how to get here from the home page anymore. So I showed you where the link is. Now, if you scroll down a little bit, we have a couple different major sections. These major sections are sex and age, race and Hispanic origin, place of death, comorbidity and other conditions, excess deaths, and additional data. Well, excess deaths kind of puts one argument to bed real quick. Some of the kookier people out there that have been saying, well, there is no pandemic, so to speak, have said, well, there's no excess deaths. And if you click on excess deaths, you see very quickly that that's not true. There are excess deaths, and it's quite apparent. So this information is available right here from the CDC. And if people are telling you that there are no excess deaths associated with any of this, again, this is just simply not true. Here's the data. So now we have gone below the excess deaths. So we're currently below what we would expect. The yellow and the red are the average expected number of deaths in the upper boundary. And right now we're below that. So that's good. But don't let people tell you that there's no excess deaths. That's just not true. All right, so now we're going to go back to the main list up on the top. And in this show, I want to show you how I've been doing the stuff with the children. So I've been publishing stuff that looks like this, that shows school-age children and how many school-age children died with COVID versus all the COVID deaths. Or I've been showing how many children 5 years and younger died from all causes versus died from COVID. And these are two different graphs that I published recently. And I want to show you sort of how do I do that? Where do I get the data for this? And we're going to focus on the children's data. All right, so I'm going to go back to the browser. And we're going to click on sex and age. And it just pops you down to the right part of the page. And there's 3 different links in the text here. So there's like a body of text, a paragraph, before we get to this whole table of numbers. And this is where the numbers and the people and, you know, all this data is not that helpful, but let me just give you sort of a quick peek at one aspect of this before we jump into the spreadsheets themselves. So this is showing us this breakdown by sex and age. And what it's showing us is all deaths involving COVID. So that's what you see here, all deaths involving COVID. And then the column right next to it is deaths from all causes. So this is, for example, children from birth to 17 years old. So infants all the way up to 17 years old. There's 1,017 that died with COVID, involving COVID. But 77,689 died from all kinds of things, including the COVID. So 77,689 versus 1,017. It sounds like we've got some bigger fish to fry. Now we go to all sexes, 18 to 29. So these are your college students, your masters, your PhDs. And we see about 6,200 deaths involving COVID, but 146,724 people of that age died from all causes. So again, how big is the COVID portion compared to deaths from all causes? So using this data, I build these charts. Now, there's a couple different places we can click here to get different downloads. The first one I think is the biggest one, and this is by month, by year, by jurisdiction, sex, and age. So let's click on this first button in the paragraph. It says click here to download. That's going to take us to a different page. The page is like the data page, and this is where you go to get what they call the data set. And this is updated April 27th, 2022. I go up here where it says export. I click that, and I'm going to click on CSV for Excel. It says, what should I do? Open this. So here's our spreadsheet directly from the CDC. So what you're looking at now, the spreadsheet that you're looking at now, is the data that we just downloaded by hitting the button here that says download. So when you hit that data, when you hit the download button, download the data from the CDC directly, they send you this. This is unadulterated and untouched. So let's dig into the data and maybe do some charts on the data and see if I can show you sort of how I do this. So the first thing I want to point out is it shows us all ages, all sexes. COVID-19 deaths are at 993,966. Under 1 year, COVID deaths, 266. 0 to 17 years, 1,017. Let's see if I can make this a little bigger so it's easier for you guys to see. 1 to 4 years, 130 children have died with COVID. But 8,176 have died with other causes. Children from 5 to 14, there's 325 that have died. Well, I keep posting numbers for school-age kids. I keep saying 5 to 17, and they don't give you 5 to 17. So how do I do that? And I'm going to show you that. This is called a derived value. And a derived value is where we're going to calculate something. So I'm going to type in what it is I'm looking to do here. School-age children, 5 to 17 years old. Okay. Now, in order to calculate that, I'm going to use the data that they've given us so that we already know that for 0 to 17, there's 1,017 children that died. So I'm going to start with that. I'm going to tell it that the formula is going to be equal to 1,017, the big number, but I want to exclude minus the children under 1 year. So the children under 1 year was 266. We don't really need that for the purposes of this. We're talking about school-age kids, 5 to 17. So I'm going to subtract that. I'm also going to subtract the children 1 to 4 years old. So I'm going to subtract that as well. And that should leave us with kids 5 to 17 years old. And that's how we do that. And that's called a derived value. So that value is not in the spreadsheet natively, but the data that they've provided to you in the spreadsheet can allow you to calculate that number. And so we're going to let the spreadsheet do its math. And it tells us that 621 children of school age have died with COVID. Okay, so that's our formula here. And if I copy that formula over to total deaths, let's see what we get. So here it shows us 25,717 children of this age died of all causes. 621 of those kids died with COVID. All right, so that's something that I might want to chart now that we've calculated that. Now, we can also look at children under 5 years, right? So if we want to know children under 5 years old, here what we can do is add the children under 1 year and add 1 to 4. And if we add those two groups together, that's everybody under 5 years old. Once they get to 5, they're accounted for elsewhere. So similarly, we have under 1 year and 1 to 4 for COVID deaths, 396. Let's copy the formula over to the total deaths from all causes. And this is where it's rather dramatic. What we see is that children under 1 year, although 266 children died with COVID, 43,796 children died in the United States under 1 year old. That is a dramatic number. That number alone, children under 1 year that died in America, that's twice as many deaths as we see in Korea, and it's about 3 times as many people as have died in all of China from coronavirus. We have children under 1 that have died in the U.S. Then we look at the number of children 1 to 4 years old that died in the U.S. That's 8,000. Another big number. That's more than how many people died from coronavirus in Australia so far in the past 2 years. So more children have died in the USA 1 to 4 years old than we've seen people die from coronavirus in Australia in the last 2 years. So these comparisons now we can chart. So we can chart school-age children, 5 to 17, how many died versus how many died of all causes, or we could chart how many died versus the total number of people that died. And we can make that chart. We can also chart children under 5 years old how many of them died with COVID versus how many died from all sorts of other things. So why don't we start with that one? Let's do children under 5 years, and let's chart the 396 COVID deaths against the 51,972 deaths from all causes. I do that by clicking on this little chart menu thing is going to pop down, and it takes the data I just pointed to and it fills in the chart for me. Now, the COVID deaths, let's scroll back over here a little bit. Right, COVID-19 deaths, this is children under 5 years old, and then the other's deaths from all causes, right? So this is total deaths, and this is COVID-19 deaths. And the thing is, with this chart, and what I'll do is go back to the CDC webpage. And when we go back to the CDC webpage, we can copy some of this and explain what this is. So these are deaths involving COVID-19, right, by age group. And I'll use that sort of definition here. So we want to add a title to the chart. So now we have our source information right there. Now I can change the colors and that kind of stuff and switch the green and the blue like this. For some reason it takes the green away. I don't know why it does this. All right. Now, the other thing that we can do here is make the wedges, instead of percentages, make it the actual numbers that represent the data. Right? So let's go ahead and do that, and then we'll move these labels around. So 51,972 children died from all causes. This is children 5 years old and younger. And that's it, guys. This is how we do this. So children 5 years old and younger, all deaths with COVID, 396. Deaths from all causes, 51,972. If you want to know what that represents in percentages, then we just change this back from number to percentage and give it some decimal places. It's 0.756%. So just about 0.75% of the children in the United States that died 5 years old or younger died with COVID. Okay. Now we can go back to the data, and now we can look at school-age children. Okay, school-age children, we have 621 children that died out of 25,717 that died from other causes, or we can compare the 621 children that died school age to 993,966 people that died with COVID. So either one of these comparisons is an interesting comparison. Now, another interesting comparison would be if we started to look at other age groups. So if we wanted to know how many of the people that died with COVID were over 65 versus younger than 65, could we calculate that? And we can. We have the data here to do that. Now, the problem is that when the CDC gives us the data, they have overlapping data sets, and they tell you about that in their disclaimer when you start. So what you need to do for that is make sure that you're not double counting. So we would count the 0 to 17, we would count the 18 to 29, 30 to 39, 40 to 49, 50 to 64, 65 to 74, 75 to 84, and then 85 and older. And we can combine all that and see, well, what portion of the people that died with COVID were 65 and older? 50 and older, 40 and older, we can look at that type of breakdown and get a better understanding. So that's the sort of thing I do with this data. And again, I'm getting this data from the CDC. From here. All right, so provisional COVID-19 deaths by sex and age. So to a certain extent, this data is in plain sight in that the CDC is publishing it. It's available. You can find it, but it's not immediately obvious how to find it if you just go right to the main CDC webpage. If you start here, you may never find it, right? It's hard. When you click on data and statistics, for example, it shows you all this heart disease and Lyme disease and STDs and viral hepatitis, surveillance resource data, related organizations. Here's the National Center for Health Statistics. This is where the death stuff comes from. So you click on that, and then you have a National Center for Health Statistics Data Detectives Camp. If you guys want your kids to be little coroners and data detectives, you can send them August 8th through 12th to the CDC's Data Detective Camp at the National Center for Health Statistics, where they track dead people. Fun for kids, a lot of fun. Let's see what else we have here. Yeah, so you see, it's not immediately obvious how to find this data. And that's why I'm providing you guys with the links and just taking you right to the page where it shows you, here's what you need to know. Sex and age, comorbidities. This has been In Plain Sight. I'm John Cullen. Thanks for joining.
Yes, the same kind of story that seems to come down from long ago. Two friends having coffee together when something flies by their window. It might be out on that lawn, which is wide, at least half of a playing field. Because there's no explaining what your imagination can make you see and feel. Your body means nothing, you'll be hypnotized. Now it's not a meaningless question to ask if they've been and gone. I remember a talk about North Carolina in a strange, strange poem. You see, the sides were like glass in the thick of a forest without a road. And if any man's hand ever made that land, then I think it would have showed. And that's why it seems like rain. They got me hypnotized. And I know that's right.